This is Chris Carlson, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Boulder Banking Podcast. My guest is Mike Stevens, president of the Graduate School of Banking at Colorado. I really enjoyed my conversation with Mike. We not only discussed the programs offered by GSBC, but Mike shared his unique perspective of both the opportunities and challenges facing community banking. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey, Mike, we got a lot to talk about today, but before we get started, can you give us a brief background of Mike Stevens?
So I was born and raised in the Midwest, and I start with that for probably reasons that I'll get to. And I started my career as a regulator quite a while ago. But the last 20 years, I worked for the Conference of State Bank Supervisors in Washington, D.C., focused on public policy and professional development. And that's why I kind of hang on to my Midwestern values and roots, because I like to say that I'm not a product of Washington, D.C. I just worked there, held firm to my Midwestern upbringing. In my time at CSBS, I had the privilege of serving on the faculty of GSBC for about 17 years. And last year, I had the enormous privilege to succeed our friend Tim Koch when he retired as the school's president. It's been a fun and rewarding position. I work with a great team of staff and faculty.
I would echo that. Your team is really, really remarkable. Well, kind of give us the GSB story from a kind of a global perspective. We're going to dive into some specific programs. I thought maybe it's a good opportunity to just give us the story.
So GSBC is 72 years old, and it was formed by the Colorado Bankers Association and the Colorado Board of Regents. So that's our connection to the University of Colorado. It's had a variety of kind of iterations of its name to get to the Graduate School of Banking at Colorado. Our hallmark is the 2-week school in July on the campus of the University of Colorado Boulder. And a student goes for 2 weeks or 3 summers. Banking school, so I get this question a lot from friends and family and neighbors, trying to understand what the school's about, and then surprised to find out that there are other schools, and we all have hundreds of students. But banking school has become a rite of passage, and especially in community banks. And I think that is just a great part of the legacy. So come July, we're going to host some 500 bankers and regulators on the campus, and I just think that's just a really great opportunity and part of the history of community banking.
Well, does GSBC serve a different mission than the other banking schools in the country?
Yeah, at their core, they're all pretty similar. The primary constituency can be a little different in the different schools, which could have an impact on some of the faculty or the content or their approach. But at their core, they're very similar. And so while we draw from all over the country, our largest participating states are agriculture. And so that's going to have an impact on kind of the size of the institutions that we attract and some of our content.
Tell us about the impact of COVID-19 on all the banking schools and specifically GSBC over the last couple of years.
Well, in 2020, it shut us all down like it did a lot of things. And we all had to make then significant changes to be able to operate in 2021. GSBC was fortunate that we were able to offer a hybrid environment. So working with the university, we were able to actually bring students on campus. We had, social distancing that we had to impact in the classroom. So we had to make adjustments in the classroom instruction. But at the same time, we also offered a virtual option for those people who were not comfortable traveling or were under an employer mandated travel restriction, whatever the issue. We had about a third or so of our students that participated virtually. It was a hard, long task for them to do it, to be able to zoom into a classroom and be able to do that all day for 10 days of classroom instruction. But they did it. It was an important accommodation that we made while still being able to house students. And while the environment was horrible, you have to adapt and make adjustments. But we always want to do that from a standpoint of like, well, what can we learn in the process? And some of the changes that we actually implemented for that environment, kind of good ideas for the long term. And so we've made some changes based on that experience. So I think that, that's a good thing. So the coming session will be fully in person, which we're really excited about. I think that's a better connection to the GSBC experience. I think we're all kind of more comfortable with how you manage that type of environment. So we're looking forward to that. But at the same time, we're doing orientation differently because of the way that we did it last year. So we did it virtually. That worked out really well. Our testing process will be a little bit different because we figured out that worked out really well. Project briefings are done virtually and not as kind of a separate class or part of a class. So we're able to kind of fold in some of those things that I think will actually continue to improve the GSBC experience.
Take me back to July of last year. You had all those students on campus. What was going through yours and the board's mind thinking, are we going to make it through to the end? Was there this waiting for the shoe to drop? What were you guys thinking?
Well, in hindsight, Chris, we threaded the needle perfectly. We were right between the two strains. And so we were kind of in this dip. Omicron hadn't really come onto the scene yet. So, but like I said, in hindsight, we threaded that needle. Look, we had all the contingencies. We had rooms reserved for people that have been tested positive for COVID and needed to be isolated. We had, protocols from the university that we had to follow. So what I'm going to say, I don't want to undermine what our posture was. We had planned for all these scenarios, worked very, very closely with the university and with a couple of local hotels to have space for anyone who ended up testing positive. So all that being said, once we got into the session, once we got everybody on campus, everyone was so happy to be together. I mean, the students there was an energy. Remember that the opening reception, which we had outside, which is, one of the distinct advantages of being in Colorado. It's just it's quite beautiful. But everybody was outside. They were together. There was so much excitement. You just kind of got caught up into it. And so the good thing was I didn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about what was going to happen. There really wasn't any point in worrying. And then just relied on your planning and that you kind of knew what to do because you had tried to think through all those things and then just enjoy the moment. And I tell you, for most all that time, we were just really focused on that experience and having people together. And then, we had technology to support to manage those that were virtual. So I would say I was really kind of caught up in the moment and we really enjoyed it. We did have a couple of positive cases that popped up midweek of the second week. And again, we notified the students. They took it in stride. We looked after the students that had the positive cases, make sure they were safe, that they were taken care of, that they had what they needed. And everything just kind of went as planned and went very smoothly. The students health-wise have all recovered. They're well, and we only ended up with those two cases even after the session. So it was very, very successful and it was really exciting. And I know the other schools are all planning on in-person sessions. All the graduate banking schools will be in person this year. And I know, look, we talk and have a consortium of school directors. I know they're going to experience that same level of excitement that we had this past summer. So I'm excited for them.
Well, let's fast forward to this year. What changes, if any, are going to be occurring at the 2022 annual session in Boulder?
My predecessor believed in continuous improvement, and we're obviously continuing down that. So a few things that I would highlight. We have a new approach to our capstone course. So a lot of the schools, if not all, have a bank simulation model that they use for third-year students. We had a little complex schedule there in the second week, so we're expanding the schedule for the simulation in the second week to incorporate some additional activity having to do with the future of the bank that the students have spent the last week and a half creating. So then what does the future look like? So I'm pretty excited about that. We're still developing what those exercises look like. It'll simplify our schedule, but it also will keep them engaged on that institution and again thinking about planning for the future, which I think is important. I'm also really excited about one of our new electives. So we've had a course for years called So You Want to Be a CEO. And so we're retooling that, and it's going to be called CEO Perspectives. And what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the technology that we have. We have tremendous technology in the law school that is where our program is housed during the summer. And so we're going to virtually interview it's a 3-day elective. And so we're going to virtually interview 3 CEOs and bring in different perspectives rather than, say, a single or a double perspective. Sometimes the course was team taught. And so we'll hear about their journey. What was the influencer around them becoming a bank CEO? What are the lessons that they learned? What are the mistakes that they made? And so really kind of tap into that experience. But then each one of them brings a different perspective. And so I want to talk to them about innovation and how they're modernizing or changing their institution, not only from a technology standpoint, but just from a business practice. We have one of our CEOs has quite a skill set in, let us say, rehabbing problem institutions. And so she'll actually then do a second session around when everything goes wrong. So, Chris, I operate under this theory that your bank, every bank will experience a problem at some point. And the severity of it may vary, but this is not an easy business. It's a risk business, and at some point you're going to kind of stub your toe. And the actions of the CEO are really, really matter. So we're going to tap into her experience. And then the last one I'm really excited about, someone who's been a CEO of 3 different banks, but also has a extensive resume when it comes to public service. And so I want to explore that aspect as well, and how they balance that role in serving the industry, serving the public, and meeting the needs of their stakeholders. And then the second part of that elective, so we have the interview piece, and the second part of that are different instructors coming in and talking about the CEO's role in managing technology. Your typical bank CEO is not a CIO type, right? They're a banker, they're a generalist. So how should a CEO go about managing that? How should a CEO? What is the CEO's role in working with the regulators? And leading and working through problems. And so we have a perspective on that. And then the last one, I think we'll talk about this program. We have a lot of information about new CEOs or people that are being groomed for the CEO suite. And so what are their top development needs? We have a lot of data on this. And so that'll be the last session. And the great thing about this is that the students will come out with a list. They will develop their own development plan and identify these are the top 5 development needs I have if I really want to be a CEO. So I'm really excited about kind of how we close out that session. So you can tell I'm really excited about this program.
I love it. Well, so certainly the annual session in Boulder is the flagship course. What other programs does GSBC offer?
I think the innovative approach that we have around the Executive Development Institute for Community Bankers is probably could be our hallmark of the future. This was started about 5 years ago and has really taken off. And this is focused on really community bank succession. And you read a lot about this, that there's not good succession alternatives either at the executive level or board level. And this is GSBC's answer to that. And so this is for new CEOs or people that have been designated as the next CEO or a high potential for that development. It's a smaller cohort, so we limit the cohort to 15 people. They meet for 4 times over 19 months. They have projects that immediately deliver value to the institution along the way. The students cannot be in competing markets, and then they sign confidentiality agreements. And so there's no excuses for not sharing in that classroom. They develop really tight relationships and really positions them well. So we ramp up their banking education. So I would say about half of the curriculum focused on enhancing around enterprise risk management and strategic planning and cybersecurity. So really pushing the envelope there. And then the other half of the program is all around leadership and culture. And the interesting thing is, time and time again, we hear from the students that that's what they really needed. That's where they really benefited. So that's really, like I said, really a great program. I think it's really making a difference for the industry. We will start a new cohort here in another month. Session meets in April and October. So we'll start a new cohort in April. We'll be running 3 cohorts for the first time. And then we also recently launched kind of a new umbrella group called GSBC Invest. And underneath this umbrella are different programs that we have around community bank investments and managing the portfolio. So next week, we will be launching an online standalone content around bond basics. A lot of entities kind of offer this, but a lot of them tend to be more brokerage houses, right, who have a product to sell. So this comes directly from a educational type of perspective. And then we have our community bank investment school that we've operated for a few years. It's housed out of the University of Colorado, Denver, and actually uses their trading room and their Bloomberg terminals to teach the class. So very hands-on and a really important school. And then we also have our annual workshop that is every September in Las Vegas. So that captures GSBC Invest. So that's our newest initiative. While we've really got EDI is on the accelerated growth.
Yeah, I'm glad we talked about that, Mike, because I think sometimes people just think of these banking schools as just the 2 weeks on campus, whatever school it happens to be. And GSBC is a great example of how extensive the education is for bankers. It's not just the 2 weeks and that's it. So thanks for sharing that. Well, let me take a step back. Let me kind of go the 30,000 foot view, as people like to see. Let's talk about community banks for a second. What do you see are the biggest opportunities for community banks going forward?
Times of stress continually validate the relationship business model. It's a reminder to all of us, consumers, business people, that relationship and having a community banker, having a banker as a community banker that you can actually call and say, I've got this need, I've got this problem. Like I said, times of stress are a reminder of the value of that. And so everything we've kind of been through, I think community banks are headed into the immediate future with a really strong reputation and demonstrated value. But banks are going to have to be strategic in how they capitalize on that. There's no resting here. But I do think that they're going into whatever this next phase is with a very strong reputation. And, a lot of consumers and business people their community bank and the value of that is front of mind. Undoubtedly, we'll get to a challenge question. I suspect, so when you think about technology, like a lot of these issues, right, it's a double-sided coin, and technology is first among those, where it's an opportunity and a challenge. There are so many solutions out there that community banks can adopt. But what I've learned, some of the work in my prior position, is that many of the solutions are affordable unless you make a mistake, and then it becomes really expensive, right? So solid decision-making, governance, and a clear strategy are going to be really important for banks as they're exploring how they further bring into technology to their business model. And banks have had to focus on the customer's expectations for this. We all are interfacing with Amazon and Zillow and Netflix, whatever your favorite technology solution is. And we like it or not, it does set an expectation for other types of businesses that we deal with. And I think that presents, there's a lot of people where if you hear this reaction from time to time about, that's just not who we are, that's not what our customers want. I challenge that a little bit because I don't think as consumers that we're walling this off. I don't think we're segregating, that's my bank and that's different. Maybe some do, but it's hard not to expect certain things when you're just used to operating in this other world. So I think that's the challenge. The good thing is that there are a lot of solutions out there, but again, it's going to take good decision making, careful planning, and a good strategy.
Mike, with your conversations with bank CEOs, especially the community banks, do they tend to be a little bit more receptive to, I'll use the term, fintech partnerships, as opposed to the big banks where they kind of think they can do it all in-house?
I did a lot of work on the community bank and public policy research conference with the Federal Reserve. It's an initiative of CSBS, Federal Reserve, and the FDIC. So I did a lot of work in starting that up, and it's going to have its 10th anniversary this year. And so it's a research conference focused just on community banking and encouraging research into the space. And I mention all that because it was really interesting. You saw this progression. I remember when we first started the conference 10 years ago, that the question around fintech was friend or foe. They just didn't know. And was it going to just eat their lunch, or was it going to help enable them? And there was just an open question. And then over in just a few years, we kind of got past that. It wasn't a friend or foe question anymore. It was really both, because you have some that are directly out there competing against and trying to take certain elements of your business. There are a lot of these solutions out there that are designed to enhance your business. So it's probably both. But then you segment it out and say, look, there are solutions out there. So I've seen it as significant change in tone and in the way that community bank CEOs talk about it, and they realize that there are certain things that they want to do, they need to do, they have to work with their core. That's a big challenge. That's all been written about. But I think there's been a big realization that they need to, their customers want it. There's a lot of efficiencies to be gained if it's done right. It can help with fraud. And so we think about it, there's actually kind of a couple aspects of this. There's the customer facing stuff, and then there's the backroom stuff where I think you get a lot of, again, fraud protection and efficiency in your operations. And so you have to kind of deal with it in two spaces. I don't think this is easy, Chris, but I do think that it's doable. And I think that the data shows they are doing it.
Well, Mike, you mentioned challenges. What challenges do you see on the horizon for community banks?
Unfortunately, very unfortunately, the political polarization is spilling over into bank regulation on the federal side. And things that have happened recently that have all been in the press and it has been written about. But people ought to recognize this is a sea change, and it's creating this whipsaw effect to regulation and expectations. And one thing I consistently heard from the industry is, we can adapt to change. We may not like it, but the industry has a compliance related culture. You tell them what's expected, they may not like it, but they will comply, right? That's the culture of banking, especially community banking. What they don't like is the whipsaw of this change and then that change and then back again. And you get it. That's problematic. So, and that's tough to do on an industry that kind of thrives on, or that knows that they want to comply, and then you keep changing the expectations. And that's really where we are right now. And unfortunately, I don't know how you put this genie back in the bottle, because historically, the way that federal agencies are structured, and that it has somewhat insulated them from, they tend to change slower, and it's tend to insulated them from politics. And we kind of busted that. And so I see that as an immediate challenge, and I don't know how we fix it. So we've got a midterm election coming up, and then that'll gear up the presidential election. And I hate to think that we are, you have a change in party in power, a wholesale change in who's running federal agencies just in one fell swoop. It's just not good for the industry, because that's what causes this whipsaw effect. So I'm really concerned about that. We crossed a big line early this year, and it was very unfortunate.
What other big changes do you see in the banking industry, be it community bank or banking in general, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Anyone who says industry consolidation, I would say, is not putting themselves out on a limb. This has been going on since 1986, and there really isn't anything to stop it. So we're just under 5,000 banks. 93% of them, it depends how you calculate it, but let's just say 93% of them are community banks, and they're getting bigger, and they're performing well. So this consolidation is going to continue, and how you define a community bank is going to get bigger. And so how does this segment of the industry continue to remake themselves for another generation? Now, there's every reason we should be positive about that, because we've been doing it for, a couple of centuries, I guess. So there's no reason to think that they can't. But to think that you don't have to would probably be the mistake. But there's a lot of creativity and innovation going out there. But they're going to have to rethink and adjust. How do I maintain the value of being a community bank, which is the relationship business model, and have a strong technology platform? How do I make those consistent? And I'm not saying they are inconsistent, but you do have to be deliberate about, hey, this will further enable us to help support our relationship business model, because we understand that's the true value, I think, of being a community bank, that connection with the community, that connection with people, being a source of creative solutions, customized solutions, not out of the box type of solutions. And so how does technology help that and not kind of take away from that? And how do you do that as banks are getting bigger and your footprint is getting bigger? How do you maintain that kind of relationship business model? I think there's some good examples out there. I think others are trying to figure it out. I think they will. They're just going to have to be deliberate about it. I think about some of this work we did for strategic plan. I'll be writing more about this over the coming months. But we looked at kind of different emerging technologies, not all that emerging, but they're probably not widely used. But this whole idea like a digital assistant or a chat bot. And, if you have a problem with an Amazon order, we all know we're probably not dealing with a human on the other end. Something like that, there is an application. Could a community bank use that and maintain their community bank, their relationship business model? Probably. But again, I wouldn't want to take that for granted. And, so I think about that. If I can work with a good chatbot and a digital assistant, but as soon as it's beyond its capability to solve my problem, get me to a human as fast as you can. And don't frustrate me. It's that sort of thing where I think you figure out what the formula is that works for community banks, because it can be terrible. It can be very efficient for the customer and efficient for the bank. I don't care as long as it works and as long as I don't, it doesn't just kind of take forever or is overly complicated. So it's those kind of things that I think that they've really got to think through. The last thing that I think we need to think about, one, banks have greater and greater needs for more specialized skill. So what is the banker of the future? Probably fewer generalists and more around compliance, more around cybersecurity, bank secrecy, technology in general. So the banker of the future is going to be a little bit different. Plus, then you overlay all the broader issues that everybody's dealing with about the worker of the future and the workplace of the future. And it would be a mistake, I think, for a bank to think, well, we're a bank, we're different, so we're not going to be affected by that, or there's nothing we can do about it because we have to follow more of a traditional model. I don't think that your worker of the future is necessarily going to see it that way. And I heard some banks talking about it last week in our meeting about some of the changes that they're making. I think COVID kind of demonstrated to them that, hey, we can do some of this. We can allow work remote and still meet our customers' needs and still be able to operate. So I think even that experience challenged what was logical thinking, right? No, we operate a bank. We operate out of a physical presence, and people come into our bank, so our employees need to be there. So it allowed us to think differently, and I think that's a long-term positive for the industry.
So since you were in Washington with all the regulators, what challenges, opportunities, threats, depending on what lens you're looking at, is these big tech companies who are buying banks? What's the view in Washington? Is that something that will accelerate, or is it something it'll be a slow process?
I do think that it'll accelerate. There are tremendous advantages that a bank charter has. It's this environment that we've created, right? So you have privileges as a bank charter in terms of access to the payment system, access to deposit insurance, and then there's the price you pay for that, right? And that's through regulation, and that's CRA, other things that, because you have these privileges, and this has been an erosion or an overlay over time, right? Because you have these privileges of insurance and the payment system, then we can put all these other expectations on you because we've got you hooked because of these other things. And look, that regulatory burden is real and significant, but it's interesting is that for some of these tech firms, they find that it's an acceptable burden, right? Because of the benefits outweigh the costs for them. So I don't really see that slowing down. knowing kind of federal agencies the way that I do, I can see that I bet some of them are a little nervous. They're comfortable with the traditional banker, right? Federal regulators go to our school too, right? And so they all get a lot of that same education. There's a common understanding, it's not always actually, I think it is a rather productive relationship, but there's a baseline of knowledge and understanding around banking from the regulatory to the regulator to the industry. I think when you start to introduce new players in that, and you saw this during the financial crisis when private equity was wanting to do some capital investments in community banks. All of a sudden, you put in this outside party that may not have the same values, incentives that, say, the traditional banker does or the traditional bank investor does. That tends to kind of put a regulator on edge a little bit. And all of a sudden, the players are changing. So that's where I see some of the hesitancy or pushback will come from. Just look at it from an individual, Chris. It's great if you want to own a bank, right? Do you really want to be a banker? Do you really want to understand banking? And if you don't, are you going to make sure that you hire the banker? We need a banker in the room. That's kind of the question. That's the critical part. You're a tech firm and you want to buy a bank. Do you really want to own a bank? Do you really want to be a banker?
It'll be interesting. More to come on that. Well, Mike, you've talked a lot about the programs. How can our listeners find out more about any of the programs offered by GSBC?
So we have a very good website, gsbcolorado.org. All of our programs are up there. You've got profiles of all of our faculty. Our staff does a great job of maintaining that. But we're also very active on LinkedIn and highlighting our alumni, highlighting our programs. We'll be writing a lot more about kind of the future of the school and strategic planning as the months go on. So very active in that space as well. I encourage you to follow us.
Great. Mike, I know you have a lot going on, a lot on your plate. Thanks for taking time out today to visit with us.
Thank you, Chris. I enjoyed it.